In Victorian England, nothing happened by accident. Not a glance, not a greeting, not the way a person entered a room. Life moved along invisible tracks, guided by rules so deeply woven into daily existence that most people rarely questioned them. To live in this world was to understand, often without being told, that every action carried meaning, and every small detail mattered more than it seemed. Imagine a city slowly waking before dawn. The streets are quiet, not because people are absent, but because noise itself has expectations. Doors close softly. Footsteps remain measured. Even the sound of movement feels restrained, as though the city itself is mindful of being observed. In Victorian life, behaviour was never just behaviour, it was communication. People did not simply exist alongside one another. They performed their roles carefully, aware that others were always watching, listening, remembering. A nod could suggest respect or disrespect. A pause in conversation could be interpreted as confidence or uncertainty. Silence was not empty. It was filled with judgment, assumption, and quiet calculation. What makes this world feel so distant is not the clothing or the architecture, but the constant awareness that nothing was neutral. There was no such thing as just being yourself, in the modern sense. The self was something shaped, trained, and refined through countless rules learned over a lifetime. From childhood onward, Victorians absorbed expectations the way stone absorbs rain, slowly and completely. These rules were rarely written down for everyday people. They existed in glances from elders, in corrected posture, in the subtle tightening of a smile when someone stepped slightly out of line. Children learned early that comfort came from fitting in, and fitting in meant knowing how to behave without asking why. Questions were unnecessary. Obedience was safer. Social life unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance. Conversations followed patterns. Introductions followed formulas. Even laughter had its place and volume. Too much joy appeared careless. Too little appeared cold. Balance was everything. The goal was not self-expression but social harmony, even if that harmony came at the cost of ease. To modern ears this may sound exhausting, and in some ways it was. Yet within this structure existed a peculiar calm. When everyone followed the same unspoken rules, the world became predictable. Predictability reduced uncertainty, and uncertainty was something Victorians feared deeply. In an age of industrial noise, crowded cities, and rapid change, rules offered something solid to hold on to. A person did not need to guess how to act. The script was already written. One simply needed to follow it correctly. There was reassurance in that. When done well, social interaction felt smooth, almost effortless, like stepping stones laid carefully across a rushing river. Of course, mistakes still happened. A wrong word spoken too soon. A gesture made without thinking. These moments lingered far longer than intended. People remembered. Reputation was fragile, and once damaged, it was difficult to repair. For this reason, caution became second nature. Better to move slowly than to risk misstep. Even the act of entering a room carried weight. Nay stood where one looked, when one spoke. All were observed. Presence itself was judged. The body was trained to respond automatically, shoulders back, movements restrained, expressions controlled. Nothing about this was casual, because casualness suggested carelessness, and carelessness had consequences. Time, too, felt structured. Days were divided into proper moments for proper activities. Morning had its tone, afternoon had its rhythm, evening demanded restraint and quiet reflection. The idea of spontaneity existed, but only within very narrow boundaries. To deviate too far was to invite attention, and attention was not always kind. Yet despite all this, Victorian life did not feel chaotic to those living inside it. It felt ordered. There was comfort in knowing one's place, in understanding what was expected, and in performing it well. The rules became a form of shared language, allowing people to move through society without constant negotiation. This world valued restraint of our impulse, observation over expression, and correctness over comfort. Emotions were not denied, but they were managed. They existed beneath the surface, controlled and measured, like a fire kept carefully behind a screen. Passion without discipline was seen as dangerous. Even small choices were rarely personal. What one wore, how one spoke, how one moved, these were reflections not just of the individual but of family, class and upbringing. To behave improperly was not merely embarrassing, it suggested deeper flaws. Character and conduct were inseparable, and so life unfolded with quiet precision. Days passed not in bold gestures but in careful repetition, the same routines, the same expectations, the same subtle corrections. Over time, these rules became invisible, felt rather than noticed. They shaped thought as much as action. In such a world, freedom did not mean doing whatever one wished. Freedom meant knowing the rules so well that one could move within them without fear. It meant blending seamlessly into the rhythm of society, neither standing out nor falling behind. Safety lived in sameness. As night fell, homes grew quieter, and the strictness of the day softened only slightly. Even rest followed expectations. The body relaxed, but discipline remained. The world did not fully release its grip, even in sleep. Order was everywhere, woven into the very fabric of existence. This was a world where nothing was casual, because nothing was allowed to be. Every moment carried weight, every action carried meaning, and every person learned, slowly and carefully, how to move through life without disturbing the delicate balance that held everything together. At first glance, Victorian rules seem heavy, even suffocating. So many expectations, so many invisible boundaries. Yet for those living within them, these rules were not always a burden. Often they were a source of quiet comfort. Beneath the strictness and formality existed something deeply human, a desire for certainty in an unpredictable world. Life in the Victorian era was filled with instability. Cities expanded rapidly, industries transformed daily routines, and social classes brushed against each other in unfamiliar ways. The world was changing faster than many people could understand. In such an environment, rules became anchors. They offered structure when everything else felt uncertain. When everyone knew exactly how to behave, there was less room for confusion. A greeting followed a known pattern. A visit unfolded according to shared expectations. Even silence had meaning. This predictability softened social anxiety. People did not need to guess what was appropriate, they already knew. The rules acted as quiet guides, gently directing each interaction. Imagine entering a room knowing precisely where to stand, when to speak, and how to respond. There was reassurance in that knowledge. Awkwardness, so common in modern life, was something Victorians worked hard to avoid. Their rules reduced the risk of embarrassment by eliminating improvisation. For many, this created a sense of emotional safety. Social life became less about personal interpretation and more about shared understanding. When everyone followed the same script, interactions flowed smoothly. There was little need to reveal one's inner thoughts or feelings. Privacy existed not only behind closed doors, but within the rules themselves. These expectations also removed the pressure of choice. In a modern world filled with constant decisions, freedom can feel overwhelming. Victorian life offered fewer options, but those options were clearly defined. One did not have to decide how to dress for every occasion, the rules already decided. One did not have to wonder how to behave, the answer was already known. This structure allowed people to move through society with confidence, as long as they stayed within the boundaries. Mastery of social rules became a skill, quietly admired and respected. Those who understood them well appeared graceful, composed, and trustworthy. Even emotions were gently regulated by these expectations. Joy was expressed modestly. Grief followed formal patterns. Anger was carefully restrained. While this limited emotional freedom, it also prevented emotional chaos. Feelings were acknowledged but never allowed to overwhelm the social order. In many ways, the rules acted as a shared agreement. Everyone promised, silently, to behave in a way that kept society stable. Breaking that agreement created discomfort, not only for the individual, but for everyone around them. This collective responsibility strengthened the sense of belonging. There was also comfort in knowing one's role. Victorian society placed great importance on identity defined by class, gender, and age. While restrictive, these roles reduced uncertainty. People understood what was expected of them and what they could expect from others. Life followed familiar patterns day after day. Even moments of social interaction carried a soothing rhythm. Conversations moved slowly. Pauses were respected. Listening was as important as speaking. There was no rush to fill silence. The pace of interaction itself was calming, encouraging restraint rather than reaction. For those who followed the rules well, life felt orderly and controlled. Mistakes were avoided through careful attention. Success came not from standing out, but from blending in. This created a quiet sense of accomplishment, a feeling of having done things correctly. Of course, not everyone benefited equally. Those who struggled to learn or follow these rules faced judgment and exclusion. Yet even this reinforced the system. The desire to belong encouraged conformity. The fear of embarrassment became a powerful motivator. Within families, rules created stability. Children grew up observing consistent behavior, learning through repetition rather than explanation. This predictability made home life feel secure, even when affection was EXP. Rest sparingly. Love existed, but it followed formal shapes. Rules also softened social boundaries between strangers. When two people met, their interaction was guided by shared expectations. This reduced uncertainty and mistrust. The rules acted like a bridge, allowing people to connect without exposing vulnerability. In this way, the Victorian world balanced restraint with reassurance. The same rules that limited personal freedom also protected individuals from social danger. They created a framework within which people could live without constant fear of making the wrong choice. As evening settled and the pace of life slowed, these rules continued to offer comfort. The day unfolded as expected. The familiar routines signaled safety. There was peace in repetition, in knowing that tomorrow would look much like today. The comfort hidden inside all those rules was not loud or obvious. It was subtle, steady, and dependable. It lived in predictability, in shared understanding, and in quiet relief of knowing exactly how to exist in the world. Morning in a Victorian house did not begin suddenly. It arrived slowly, quietly, as though even the day itself followed rules. Long before anyone opened their eyes, the house was already awake. Walls held the night's cold. Floorboards remembered every step taken upon them. Curtains filtered the weak light of dawn with careful restraint. You wake not to an alarm, but to stillness. The air feels heavy and cool against your skin. The bed beneath you is firm, unyielding, shaped more by expectation than comfort. Movement is deliberate. Even stretching feels like something that should be done carefully, quietly, without disturbance. The house seems aware of you. Every sound carries. A small shift of fabric, a soft breath, the faint creak of wood beneath the mattress. These sounds are not loud, yet they feel noticed. Victorian homes were not built for privacy in the modern sense. They were built to observe. Bedrooms are orderly spac. Yes, not personal sanctuaries. Furniture stands where it belongs. Clothing waits, arranged and prepared. Nothing feels accidental. The room reflects discipline rather than relaxation. Even at rest, the body is expected to maintain a certain dignity. Rising from bed is a practiced motion. Feet meet the cold floor without hesitation. There is no lingering, no indulgence. Time itself seems structured, pressing gently but firmly forward. Morning has duties, and those duties begin immediately. Clothing is not chosen freely. It follows rules shaped by age, gender, and status. Each layer serves a purpose beyond warmth. Fabric covers not only the body, but intention. Dressing is a quiet ritual, completed step by step, without haste. Buttons are fastened carefully. Sleeves fall into place. The mirror, if there is one, reflects not vanity, but correctness. As you move through the house, its presence becomes more pronounced. Hallways guide your steps. Doors open and close softly. Voices remain low. Even when alone, behavior remains restrained. Habits formed through years of expectation do not disappear in solitude. The house is full of signals. A closed door means something. An open one means something else. Every object has a place, and that place matters. To move something unnecessarily is to disturb order. Order, above all, must be preserved. Servants, if present, move with quiet efficiency. Their routines are practiced, almost invisible. They appear when needed and fade when not. Their presence reinforces the sense that the house is always functioning, always attentive. Even those who live within its walls are part of its system. Meals are anticipated, not announced. Breakfast follows structure, not appetite. Seating arrangements matter. Conversation remains appropriate to the hour. Morning is not a time for emotional display. It is a time for preparation, for readiness. Windows let in light cautiously, filtered through curtains and glass. The outside world exists beyond walls, but it feels distant. Inside, the rhythm of the house sets the pace. Every sound, every movement feels guided. Even posture matters. How one stands, how one walks, how one holds their hands. All are habits learned early and reinforced daily. The body itself becomes disciplined, responding automatically to expectation. The house teaches without words. It corrects through silence. A misplaced object feels wrong immediately. A careless sound feels too loud. Over time, the inhabitants internalize these lessons. They learn to move softly, to exist without disruption. This constant awareness shapes the mind. Thought slows. Actions become measured. There is little room for impulsive behavior. Even emotions are moderated by the environment. The house encourages calm, restraint, and control. Morning tasks unfold predictably. Washing, dressing, arranging belongings, all follow familiar patterns. There is comfort in this repetition. The predictability of routine reduces uncertainty. Our completed task reinforces a sense of order. The house does not judge loudly. It does not need to. Its expectations are clear. To live within it is to adapt. Over time, the feeling of being watched fades, replaced by habit. Awareness becomes instinct, yet the sense remains, subtle and constant. The house remembers. It holds echoes of past movements, past voices, past lives. To exist within it is to be part of something larger than oneself. As the morning progresses, the house grows busier, yet never chaotic. Sounds increase but remain controlled. Activity builds, but order remains intact. The structure holds. In this environment, individuality softens. The house does not erase the self, but it shapes it. Behavior aligns with expectation. Comfort comes not from freedom, but from correctness. By the time the day truly begins, the house has already done its work. It has guided, restrained, and prepared those within it. The morning has passed quietly, efficiently, without disruption. Aching up in such a house means understanding that nothing goes unnoticed. Every movement matters, every habit has been learned, and every day begins the same way, carefully, quietly, and completely within the rules. In Victorian life, very few rules were explained directly. No one gathered you aside to list them carefully, and no book spelled them out in plain language. And yet, somehow, everyone seemed to know exactly what to do. Behavior was learned quietly, absorbed through observation, repetition, and gentle correction rather than instruction. From a young age, people learned by watching. Children observed how adults entered rooms, how they greeted one another, how long they held eye contact, and when they looked away. These small details were noted, copied, and practiced until they felt natural. No questions were asked. Understanding came through imitation. Correction rarely arrived as harsh discipline. More often, it came as silence, a raised eyebrow, or a pause that lasted just a moment too long. These subtle signals carried meaning. They taught lessons without words. Over time, people became sensitive to these cues, adjusting their behavior automatically. Social spaces functioned like quiet classrooms. Every visit, every conversation, every shared meal reinforced expectations. The rules were always present, yet never announced. Those who followed them blended in seamlessly. Those who did not felt exposed, even if no one spoke of it openly. Greeting someone, for example, required careful attention. Too much enthusiasm appeared improper. Too little seemed cold. The correct tone depended on status, familiarity, and setting. These distinctions were understood instinctively by those raised within the system. To outsiders, they remained invisible and confusing. Posture itself was a form of behavior. Standing too casually suggested carelessness. Sitting too stiffly suggested discomfort. Balance was everything. The body learned to hold itself in a way that appeared composed but effortless. This physical discipline became second nature. Conversation followed similar patterns. One did not interrupt. One waited patiently for the appropriate moment to speak. Topics were chosen carefully, guided by time, place, and company. Certain subjects belonged only in certain settings. Knowing what not to say was just as important as knowing what to say. Silence played a powerful role. Silence could signal respect, thoughtfulness, or restraint. It could also serve as a quiet warning. Victorians were skilled at using silence to communicate disapproval without confrontation. A lack of response often spoke louder than words. Because rules were unspoken, mistakes felt deeply personal. There was no instruction manual to consult, no clear explanation to reference. If something went wrong, the fault appeared to lie entirely with the individual. This created a strong motivation to observe carefully and remember details. Over time, behavior became automatic. Decisions we were made without conscious thought. Hands moved the right way. Words emerged in the proper order. The mind learned to scan a room quickly, noting who was present and adjusting behavior accordingly. This system rewarded attentiveness. Those who paid close attention thrived socially. They navigated gatherings smoothly, avoided embarrassment, and earned quiet respect. Their success was measured not in praise but in acceptance. For those who struggled, the experience was more difficult. Without clear explanations, learning depended on sensitivity and adaptability. Some people never fully mastered the rules, and their discomfort became visible despite their efforts. Yet even this reinforced the importance of conformity. Behavior also differed depending on context. What was acceptable at home might be improper elsewhere. Public spaces demanded greater restraint. Private spaces allowed slightly more ease but never complete freedom. The rules shifted subtly, and learning to recognize these shifts required constant awareness. Class played a role as well. Expectations changed depending on social position. Knowing how to behave meant knowing one's place. This knowledge was communicated quietly, through experience rather than instruction. Despite its strictness, this system created a shared understanding. Because everyone learned the same way, behavior became predictable. This predictability reduced conflict. People knew what to expect from one another, and that knowledge brought a sense of stability. The absence of formal teaching made the rules feel natural rather than imposed. They did not appear as restrictions, but as the proper way of doing things. Over time, they became part of identity itself. Even emotions were shaped by this process. Feelings were expressed within accepted boundaries. Strong emotions were moderated through learned restraint. The goal was not to eliminate feeling, but to present it correctly. As adulthood arrived, the lessons of observation continued. Behavior evolved, but the method of learning remained the same. One watched, adapted, and refined. There was always something new to notice, some subtle expectation to master. In this way, Victorian society trained its members without ever formally teaching them. Knowledge passed quietly, from glance to gesture, from pause to posture. Understanding grew slowly, deeply, and often invisibly. To behave correctly was not a matter of memorization, but of awareness. It required attention, patience, and a willingness to adjust. Those who succeeded moved through life smoothly, rarely drawing attention to themselves. And so, behavior became a language spoken without words, learned without lessons, and understood without explanation. It guided every interaction, shaping lives gently but firmly, until following the rules felt as natural as breathing. In Victorian society, clothing was never just clothing. It was a quiet language, spoken without sound, understood at a glance. Every fabric, every button, every layer carried meaning. To dress was not simply to cover the body, but to communicate identity, intention, and respect for the world around you. From the moment a person stepped outside their private room, their clothing began to speak on their behalf. It revealed social position, level of formality, and awareness of propriety. A well-chosen outfit signaled discipline and reliability. A careless one suggested something less flattering. Getting dressed was a deliberate process. Layers were added in a specific order. each serving a purpose beyond comfort. Clothing shaped posture, restricted movement, and guided behavior. It reminded the wearer how to sit, how to stand, and how to move through space with restraint. Colors mattered. Darker tones suggested seriousness and respectability. Lighter shades carried different meanings depending on time and setting. Nothing was random. Even patterns could imply social awareness or lack thereof. To choose incorrectly was to send the W or O. NG message. Accessories carried their own vocabulary. Gloves, for example, were not merely practical. They governed interaction. When to wear them, when to remove them, and how to hold them all followed unspoken rules. A gloved hand suggested formality and distance. Bare hands suggested familiarity, but only when permitted. Hats functioned in much the same way. Removing a hat acknowledged respect. Leaving it on could be seen as careless or rude. These small gestures were noticed immediately, interpreted without discussion. Clothing turned everyday movements into statements. Women's clothing emphasized modesty and restraint. Dresses covered the body fully, guiding posture and limiting stride. The design itself encouraged controlled movement. Sitting, walking, and even breathing followed the garment's structure. Clothing became a constant reminder of expectation. Men's clothing carried its own discipline. Tailored coats, stiff collars, and carefully chosen fabrics signaled seriousness and self-control. Appearance reflected character. A well-dressed man appeared trustworthy and respectable. A poorly dressed one invited judgment. The weight of clothing was felt throughout the day. It was present in every movement, every pause. Yet over time, wearers adapted. The body learned to move within these boundaries. What once felt restrictive became familiar. Even inside the home, clothing followed rules. Morning attire differed from evening attire. Public-facing garments differed from private ones. Yet privacy itself remained limited. Clothing maintained a certain level of formality at all times, reinforcing the idea that appearance mattered even when few were watching. Children learned this language early. They were dressed according to their role and taught quietly what their clothing represented. As they grew, their garments changed, signaling maturity and new expectations. Clothing marked transitions in life without a word spoken. Mistakes in dress were not easily forgiven. Wearing something inappropriate for the occasion suggested ignorance or disregard for social norms. Such errors were remembered, discussed quietly, and used to form opinions about character. Yet for those who understood the language, clothing offered reassurance. It provided clear guidance. One did not need to guess how to present oneself. The rules were already known. Dressing correctly meant fitting in, blending seamlessly into the social fabric. Clothing also acted as a form of protection. It created emotional distance. Layers concealed the body and, in many ways, the self. Feelings remained private. The outer appearance remained composed. Even when inner thoughts were unsettled, there was comfort in this separation. Clothing allowed people to present a controlled version of themselves to the world. It reduced vulnerability. The rules of dress created a barrier between public life and private emotion. As the day progressed, clothing continued to guide behavior. Movements remained measured. Gestures stayed restrained. The body responded to the garment's limits, encouraging stillness and control. Even wear and tear mattered. Well-maintained clothing signaled diligence and self-respect. Neglect suggested disorder. The condition of one's attire became another layer of communication. Over time, this language became effortless. People no longer thought consciously about what their clothing said. They felt it. They understood instinctively when something was right or wrong. In this way, clothing became more than fabric and thread. It became a system of signs, quietly reinforcing social order. It shaped identity, guided interaction, and maintained boundaries. As evening approached and garments were finally loosened or removed, the language did not disappear. Its lessons lingered in posture, movement, and habit. Even without the clothing, the discipline remained. When clothing became a language, it taught people how to exist in the world without speaking. It reminded who they were expected to be and how carefully they were expected to behave. In Victorian life, privacy was not something one expected by default. It was limited, conditional, and often incomplete. Even when alone, a person was never fully unseen. The rules of society followed them quietly, shaping behaviour long after doors were closed. Homes were shared spaces, filled with movement, sound, and observation. Walls were thin, hallways echoed, and footsteps carried. A house held many lives at once, and each life was aware of the others. Solitude existed only in brief moments, never entirely free from expectation. Bedrooms, though personal in name, were not entirely private. They reflected order rather than individuality. Furniture stood arranged with intention. Objects belonged where they were placed. The room itself seemed to watch, reminding its occupant how to behave even in quiet moments. Even when no one else was present, habits remained. Posture stayed composed, movement stayed restrained. Years of observation had trained the body to behave correctly without conscious effort. The idea of fully relaxing, of letting go completely, felt unfamiliar. Privacy was limited not only by space, but by mindset. Victorian society valued appearance deeply. This concern did not fade when one was alone. People carried the gaze of others within themselves, acting as though they were always being observed. Clothing reinforced this constant awareness. Even nightwear followed strict expectations of modesty and coverage. The body remained concealed, protected from exposure even in sleep. Comfort came second to propriety. The rules did not pause at bedtime. Sound, too, was carefully controlled. Loud noises were avoided. Doors closed softly. Voices stayed low. Silence was preferred, not as emptiness, but as a form of discipline. Quiet behaviour demonstrated respect for the shared environment. Letters were private, yet even they followed conventions. Words were chosen carefully, emote. Ions expressed indirectly. Nothing was said without thought. Privacy existed, but it was filtered through restraint. Servants, when present, further limited solitude. Their movements were quiet, but constant. Their presence reminded residents that the household functioned as a whole. Individual life blended into collective routine. Even thoughts were shaped by this environment. Feelings were examined, moderated, and often withheld. Emotional privacy was rare. Self-control became a virtue, admired and expected. Expressing too much of one's inner life felt risky. Moments alone became opportunities for reflection rather than release. Stillness replaced expression. Calm replaced spontaneity. The absence of privacy encouraged introspection rather than indulgence. This constant awareness created a sense of internal order. People learned to regulate themselves without external enforcement. The rules became internal companions, guiding behaviour quietly. Yet this lack of privacy also created stance from the self. Personal desires softened over time. Identity aligned with expectation. Individuality existed, but it was subtle, carefully contained. Even illness or fatigue did not fully excuse relaxation. Weakness was hidden when possible. Composure remained important. To appear uncollected was to risk judgment. Even within one's own mind, the night offered only partial relief. Darkness softened the edges of the day, but the rules remained. Sleep came within boundaries. Position, clothing, and routine followed familiar patterns. Rest was allowed, but never careless. Dreams may have wandered freely, but waking life remained structured. The morning returned with its expectations intact. Privacy did not expand with time. It remained narrow, consistent, and controlled. This way of living shaped deep habits. People learned to find comfort within restraint. Peace came from order rather than freedom. Stability replaced spontaneity. Living without privacy did not feel unnatural to those raised within it. It was simply how life worked. The constant presence of expectation became familiar, even reassuring. There was safety in knowing what was allowed. Boundaries created predictability. Within those limits, life unfolded calmly, if quietly. Over time, the line between public and private blurred. Behavior remained consistent regardless of audience. The self presented to the world became the self experienced alone. In this world, privacy was not absence of others, but mastery of oneself. Control replaced concealment. Discipline replaced release. And so, even when alive, even when alone, Victorians lived within the same careful structure. The rules did not fade. They softened, perhaps, but never disappeared. Life continued quietly, shaped by habits learned long ago. Privacy remained limited, but order remained strong. And within that order, many found a strange, steady peace. From the outside, Victorian life appears overwhelming. So many rules, so much restraint, so lit. No room for spontaneity. Yet for those who lived within it, this way of life often felt reasonable, even comforting. The rules were not seen as obstacles, but as foundations holding everything steady. The Victorian world was not a gentle one. Illness was common, work was demanding, cities were crowded and loud. Change arrived quickly and without warning. In such an environment, structure became a form of protection. Rules created order where chaos threatened to take hold. Knowing what was expected removed uncertainty. People did not have to negotiate every interaction or interpret endless possibilities. The correct response was already known. This reduced mental strain. Life moved forward along familiar paths, guided by shared understanding. Rules also created fairness of a particular kind. While they favored some more than others, they applied consistently within each social space. Predictability mattered more than flexibility. When outcomes followed known patterns, people felt prepared. Routine played a powerful role. Days unfolded with steady rhythm. Morning, afternoon, and evening each carried their own expectations. Repetition softened hardship. Familiar actions brought reassurance. Even difficult lives felt manageable when shaped by routine. The rules also reduced emotional exposure. In a world where vulnerability could be dangerous, restraint offered safety. Feelings were kept private, shared carefully if at all. This distance protected individuals from judgment and gossip. Belonging mattered deeply. Following the rules signaled membership in society. It showed respect for shared values. To belong was to be protected, acknowledged, and included. The fear of exclusion encouraged cooperation. Rules also preserved dignity. Even in poverty or illness, proper behavior allowed individuals to maintain self-respect. Appearance and conduct mattered regardless of circumstance. This offered a sense of worth when other comforts were absent. Social order depended on predictability. Without clear expectations, misunderstandings would multiply. The rules functioned as a shared language, allowing people to interact smoothly despite differences in background. Authority, too, was reinforced through rules. Institutions relied on them to function. Families, workplaces, and communities remained stable because behavior followed known patterns. Stability reduced conflict. There was also comfort in limitation. Choice can be exhausting. When options are endless, decisions become burdens. Victorian life offered fewer choices but clearer paths. This simplicity eased mental pressure. Even creativity found its place within boundaries. Expression existed, but in controlled forms. Poetry, art, and conversation followed structure. Creativity was refined rather than explosive. Over time, the rules shaped identity. People understood themselves through their roles. These roles provided purpose. Knowing one's place brought clarity. Ambiguity was minimized. The rules also created continuity between generations. Traditions passed smoothly from parent to child. Knowledge transferred quietly. This sense of continuity connected individuals to something larger than themselves. While modern perspectives often value freedom above all else, Victorians valued stability. Freedom without structure felt risky. Order promised survival. In a fragile world, that promise mattered deeply. Even those who quietly resented the rules often relied on them. They provided protection even while limiting movement. The structure held everyone, whether they acknowledged it or not. As years passed, the rules became habits. Habits became instinct. Life felt natural within its boundaries. What once required effort became automatic. There was peace in knowing how the world worked. Predictability reduced fear. Familiarity replaced anxiety. The future, while uncertain, followed recognizable patterns. The rules also softened loss. Grief followed formal rituals. Mourning had shape and dura. These structures helped people endure sorrow without being overwhelmed. In many ways, the rules acted as invisible companions. They guided behavior quietly, offering support without conversation. They reminded people how to continue when emotions threatened to overwhelm. From a modern distance, it is easy to judge this life as overly strict. Yet within its context it made sense. It answered the needs of its time. Order provided safety, restraint provided dignity, routine provided comfort. Together they formed a world that felt survivable. A life full of rules was not empty. It was measured, deliberate, and carefully balanced. Within its limits, people found meaning, stability, and a quiet sense of control. And so, while the rules shaped every movement and thought, they also held life together. In a changing world, they offered something solid, something reliable, something that made sense.